So, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening and good morning, wherever you may be watching us, right, from whatever part of the universe right now and in the future as well. So, it's always good to acknowledge the the future, right, and how this will come to our hearts. As I was saying earlier, super excited and happy to be together with you again, bring another parable as we study Jesus' teachings, right? As we study these enlightening moments that um, Jesus brought to all of us. Who have heard of this parable, the parable of the blind leading the blind? Where's Christian when I need her? Because the reason I'm saying this is Christian actually sent me a message the other day with some of the pictures of the blind leading the blind, and she's like, "I found this." She was super excited. I found this actually trying to study the parable before we come to the center, and I'm like, "Great," because she's like, "I'm going to be asking questions." Great, so ask questions. And I say the same thing to you. If you don't know, it's okay to ask questions. If it's not clear, please ask questions. But the parable of the blind lead the blind, and this is a beautiful actually painting over here of blind people leading blind people. This parable is actually in two gospels, the gospel of Luke 6:39 and Matthew 15:12-14. And we will cover both of them. It's a little bit, don't be scared, because we will do some reading as well, because we have to bring to context to our lives what Jesus meant when he said the blind leading the blind. In both of them, they're not the two gospels do not bring the message in the same way. They bring in a different ways, but it covers one thing that we all working on, which is to become better men, women, right? A better society, because it covers two of our um, sickness that we still have in our society, and it's so acute that we need to stop. We need to stop and think, um, who am I being guided, and who am I guiding as well in my life? So on this note, the on what I would like to invite everyone is to make sure that even though we will bring some examples, it's not for us to point out who is leading me, and it's the this this leader's fault, right? That actually I'm following on wherever we're falling, right? But for us to take responsibility of, number one, why we're blind. Number two, right? Am I asking for help for the right individual, for the right group of people, for the right ideals of life, right? And if in fact I'm asking for help, am I asking, is this the right person to guide me? Not that we're gonna go ahead and put it away and say everybody's bad, everybody's blind, right? If we look at our position in life, our parents, for example, were they or are they perfect? No, they're not. We parents, many of us are parents, right? Are we perfect? No. We hope that each one of us take from our parents, and we're grateful for what they gave us, because that's what they could offer us. And we learn from the mistakes that they made. We don't do the same, right? And we don't lead other people blindly, because my father taught me this way, my mother taught me this way. So the parenthesis that I want to make at the beginning of this is for us to make sure that we take responsibility, right? If we're blind, well, guess what? Yeah, there are a lot of things that that have happened in the past that perhaps led me to this blindness. But most important, with spiritism nowadays, especially, we are responsible for it, right? And this may sound, oh my God, responsible. Yeah, we are. But we got to take a step back and say this responsibility needs to allow us to change, right? When we accept that we're blind. Again, hopefully we get this point, because it's very easy to be those individuals, those four individuals in the back, and blame. Uh, I'm sorry, the five individuals in the back, and blame the one who fell first, right? Or be the one in the front and say, right, thinking that we have uh, uh, we're so righteous that We are. This is the second one that I worked on, and bringing my condition here. Second parable that we have chosen to talk about it, that it was a challenge because it's like what is he trying to bring with this parable? Who is he talking to? What is the? We see this nowadays, right? We see this in politics at work. We see this in schools. We see this at our circle of life, our family members, right? The blind leading the blind. And we also have to understand what we are we like to be blind sometimes, right? It's okay. You know what? It's easier for me to go ahead and help instead of me going and saying, no, worthy enough that I can learn, that I can make a difference in my life. I need help. We live in society, right? We were born in. So therefore, being that cell of society, we live in society. We depend on one another, right? We are also self-sufficient that we can hear often, but hopefully will make your life much better. So let us examine um, both parables. I'm sorry, the parable on both gospels, but I did not just brought 39. I brought the whole thing for us to kind of get an idea who is Jesus talking to, why he's saying the way he's saying, and back to our lives, right? Right? Disclosure here, usually say let's think about it, right? We analyze each point. The elements and the individuals outside of the parable or inside of the parable. We're not going to go dive into that today, covering two gospels. So I want you to make sure that we have enough time to cover everything. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaking together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with this measure you use, it will be measured to you. So we can clearly see that we're talking about judgment, right? We're talking about how we apply ourselves towards others. The same will be done towards us. So we stop and say, let's not judge, right? Do not condemn. Forgive, because we also want to be forgiven. He also told them this parable. Can the blind lead the blind? Will they not both fall into a pit? The student is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like the teacher. Why do you look at this speck of sawdust in your brother's eyes and you pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when you yourself fail to see the plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Once more, how can we judge if we ourselves are not judging ourselves? And I say judge here, please don't judge in ourselves, because the worst thing that we can do, especially in the spirit of the center, is to lead others to be judgmental of ourselves. Guess what? What happened yesterday? It was yesterday. Was it wrong? Yes. But tomorrow today or tomorrow, I'm gonna try to become a better person, right? And that is a learning curve for us yesterday, for us to become a better individual. Other than that, it serves no purpose, right? That feeling of guilt that keeps coming back and back and back and back, and we don't move on, right? We stay stuck. And there is a beautiful example that we're going to bring towards the end as well. Remind me if I forget about this idea of staying stuck, right? So this is Luke, right? So remember, judgment. Let's take a look now on Matthew. Matthew is a little bit longer, so stay with me, and we're going to stop and kind of breathe a little bit. So he says, then some Pharisees and teachers of the law came to Jesus from Jerusalem and asked, Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? They don't wash their hands before they eat. Jesus replied, and why do you break the command of God for the sake of your tradition? For God said, honor your father and mother, and anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. But you say that if anyone declares that what might have been used to help their father or mother is devoted to God, they are not to honor their father or mother with it. Thus, you nullify the word of God for the sake of your tradition. You hypocrites, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. And these are parts of the teachings of Isaiah when he said, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human ruse. Continue. Are we okay thus far? Okay. Jesus called the crowd to him and said, listen and understand. What goes into someone's mouth does not defile them, but what comes out their mouth, that is what defiles them. Then the disciples came to him and asked, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this? Right? So then they're coming back to Jesus and say, well, the Pharisees are upset that you said what you said, right? Because they try to put him in a position where you're going against the law. And Jesus actually said, am I? When you're the one who is disrespecting your own tradition. Then, he replied, every plant that my heavenly Father has not planted will be pulled up by the roots. Leave them. They are blind guides. If the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit, as we saw in the picture. One will fall, the second will fall, so on and so forth. Peter said, explain the parable to us, because it's not very clear, right? Are you still so dull? Jesus asked them. Don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? But the things that come out of the person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them. For out of the heart, come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, and slander. These are what defile a person, but eating with unwashed hands does not defile them. We have to bring this idea, this whole context, we understand that it's beautiful to, and I remember when Haroldo Dutra said this, and it's very interesting. But culture, tradition is extremely important. It's very valid when it brings people together. The moment that we start to use culture and traditions to separate one another, then there's no purpose, because it's not converging people. It's not bringing them together. We're not going back to the same God, right? Because my God is better than yours, or the opposite, right? So these are exactly what some of the elements inserted in this idea that the Pharisees and teachers of the law brought to Jesus, saying, are you really who you say you are, right? And then within their own traditions, Jesus brings to them, look, it's beautiful what you're doing, right? In terms of showing yourself the way you want to show yourself, but the things that comes out of your mouth, it's not helpful. Quite the opposite. It's actually leading other people into a pit. Blind individuals leading others blindly as well. So let's summarize this whole thing more than we have done already, try to do so. So we see that the first one is there's an element of or a basis of judgment, as we mentioned. And the second one, it's to show what truly corrupts us, right? What is corrupting me right now? It's not that I took that beautiful piece of cake when I just ran from outside and I didn't wash my hand. I am bringing to our lives nowadays, right? But what comes out of it? It's not that I ate quite a little bit more than I was supposed to. Yeah, we need to take care of those things, but What am I doing with my thoughts, my feelings? So, what are the traditions that we are following now, right? What are the things that we are following that we do that we think that was so self-centered that we like others to do as well, that sometimes they are commendable, right? Versus the things that I'm saying or that I'm thinking. Sometimes we're an angel when we speak to others, right? But what are the things that I'm thinking? And towards ourselves as well, right? Towards ourselves. Because if we're punishing ourselves, if we're judging ourselves the way the message is bringing to us, what will I do to my neighbor? The same thing will be applied, right? So let us think. Let us take a deep breath and think. What am I doing with these teachings? What am I doing in my day-to-day life, right? When I see something, am I accusing, right, someone else? When we see someone on the side of the road, what are my thoughts? What are my reactions? To complain, right? Because we know that thoughts are, it's energy, right, being processed. So let us bring this to heart. It's not just a physical thing. Because in the past, there was this tradition to look, well, we're going to study a little bit more about this, but what am I doing today? And recently we were talking about the work environment with a friend of ours that we're doing a work together, spiritist work together. And we're talking about how people, they dress well, extremely well sometimes, right? And we're like, okay, but the character of that individual, the clothes is not doing so well. And it's okay to dress well, be elegant, be somebody who is showing themselves well, right? But if the attitude doesn't go along, it defeats not only defeats the purpose, but it confirms that the individual is in fact lost behind those clothes, right? Or the beautiful car, or the beautiful status of the work and whatnot, right? So one of the things that we want to connect this is with the obstacles that we have in our lives for us to proceed, right? In the Spirit's book, question 785, we learned that the two main obstacles from progress is pride and selfishness. And the Spirits actually say, I'm referring to moral progress since intellectual progress is always occurring. And it's exactly what's happening now, right? Technology is way ahead of us, right? Right now, we're going through this, trying to create laws and legislation to stop the individual from just saying something to the computer and doing the things that we know that we can do nowadays, right? It's not recent. This technology is not recent, but it's now available to the public that we can see that we can do some let's call it this in a nice way, some damage with it, right? Kids are now being exposed to things that perhaps we need to take a step back and say how much power this is. Not that we're trying to stop technology or the progress, intellectual progress, but we need to think, are we ready for certain things, right? Much like us giving a car to a 90-year-old to drive. He or she may be able to develop the capability to drive that car, but we know that they're not mature enough to deal with that machine, right? So there are a lot of things that we're doing, but pride and selfishness. And when we look at these two passages, we see that. We see that there is the pride of the culture, right? The pride and the selfishness of the Pharisees. Those are individuals, the individuals that were going back to Jesus and saying, what's going on? Are you truly the master, right? They did not have the capability to humble themselves and say, let me try to learn from this individual, right? Some of them did. We know, through the studies of Spiritism, that some of them did. Some of them actually, Nicodemus as one, there was a hint that he gives us that even though he was questioning, he went in the middle of the night, right? Not to be seen, to say, let me go talk to this guy, right? Let me see if this guy, in fact, is what everybody's saying. And we keep at that. But let's remember these two things, pride and selfishness. What I would like to do as well, since we talked about the Pharisees. It's to rescue something from the gospel according to Spiritism. And yes, we're going to read, because reading studying this passage, it made me go through and truly try to study, and I need to do more studying to it, what the Pharisees were, right? This part of the book, the historical facts, the introduction, we will see that Kardec brings the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes, all these group of individuals that, we hear back and forth, but sometimes we have no connection whatsoever. But looking at those individuals then, and looking at ourselves today, we see that we have a little bit of them in our lives, right? Sometimes we act just like it. And since we're not Spiritist center, guess what? Perhaps we were back there doing the same things that they were doing, right? And that's why we act the way we act today. That's why sometimes our pride and selfishness is so harsh that we can't move on. We continue to be blind. We allow us to be led by other blind people as well. So the Pharisees, what were the Pharisees? Pharisees from the Hebrew parish, meaning division, separation. Tradition formed an important part of Jewish theology. It consisted in the compilation of the successive interpretations given to the meaning of the scriptures, and which became articles of dogma. Amongst scholars, tradition was the object of unending arguments, most frequently concerning simple issues as to words or form, similar to the theological dispute and subtleties of scholasticism during the Middle Ages. Different sects result from all of this, with each claiming to have a monopoly on the truth, and, as almost always happens, cordially detesting one another. I'll just read the next one. Among these sects, the most influential was that of the Pharisees, whose head was Hillel, a Jewish scholar born in Babylonia and founder of a famous school where it was taught that faith arose only from the scriptures. The Pharisees' origin date back to 180 to 200 BC. The Pharisees were persecuted at various times, notably under Hyrcanus, high priest and king of the Jews, Aristobulus I, and Alexander, king of Syria. However, after Alexander restored their honor, and their assets, they reacquire their power, which they retained until the downfall of Jerusalem in 770 AD, at which time their name disappeared as a result of the diaspora. So we see here that several groups of individuals were created based on the debate on how to interpret the scripture. My way is the correct way. Your way is wrong. This is for me and for me only, not for you. The pride and selfishness, right? It's the arguments that perhaps we had then and we still have today. To look in someone else's eye and say, this is the correct way. This is my way. If you don't like it, guess what? Separation, right? Sometimes it's a small argument. Sometimes it's a small thing. And then we allow ourselves to lose ourselves and to lose one another, right? And we start to blindly being guided by another blind feeling, another blind thought. Connect not only with the incarnated ones, but the discarnated one as well. It's okay for us to put ourselves and say, I agree with this. But what else is there? What else is there? But when we start nitpicking thing, saying, oh, this is it, I can't go with, then something, we need to broaden our perspective about life, right? It gets better. It gets better. 2 more paragraphs. The Pharisees took an active part in religious controversies, servile observers of outward worship practice and ceremonies, ardent zealots for proselytism, and enemies of anybody with new ideas. They feigned great strictness of principles. Just right here, we can see it's happening today. When we come in contact with somebody and say, "Let me show you something new," we already put everything down. It's like, what are you trying to do? Say that I'm wrong? No, there's something new. There's a different way that you can do this task. I often joke about when I ask someone at work to do something, right? A task that I have been doing for ages, and they do much faster, much more efficiently. And I'm like, "You already done?" They're like, "Yeah." "Oh, show me how you did this, because it took me much longer." And then I joke with the person, and I thought I knew everything, right? Because they were able to develop or to do the same task much faster. And it's okay. It's okay. That's why we live in community. We need to learn from one another. But there are situations that we may take that as somebody trying to an affront, right? Or somebody really putting us down or testing us. However, behind the appearances of meticulous devotion, they hid dissolute habits, much pride, and above all, an excessive passion for control. Religion for them was more of a means to rise through the ranks than an object of authentic faith. They, they possessed only the appearances and ostentation of virtue. Nevertheless, they exerted a great influence on the people, in whose eyes they were regarded as holy. That is why they were so powerful in Jerusalem. Not only they were blind in their ways, but they were able to manipulate the masses because the way they showed themselves. But inside, they were not perfect. And they did not even allow themselves to think that perhaps there is more to life than this, right? Their pride was so up there that, no, I am it. I am the truth, right? And also in this test, we see that people allowed themselves to be guided by them. They followed blindly. I'll put a parenthesis here. I heard something really interesting recently. I can't remember now, and forgive me for this, but I like to always give the name of the person. It's very easy for us to look back and say, "Oh, this was wrong." The individuals who were following the Pharisees, they were wrong. How can you be that blind? Well, guess what? If we were there, we're probably doing the same. When we see all these great leaders, right, of the world, and we say, "Oh my gosh, how many people were following this? This is so wrong." But that's exactly what we're living now, if we think about it. We follow the masses. We were told directly and indirectly, follow this, do this, right? Through the internet, through our friends, through work, through what we don't even discuss sometimes, right? And we start following. Think that this is the correct way to live our lives. The end of the year is coming. What we are marked for our end of the year? The festivities, right? Buying gifts. Nothing wrong with that. But how many years we have been living in this physical body now, perhaps even before, right? Don't know how long ago Christmas has become commercialized, but we think that Christmas is it. And we narrow our lives and our condition to see what Christmas is based on what we see on the TV, then now on the web, all the different commercials that we get, right? I'm just giving an example, folks. And please don't think that I'm, banishing Christmas or anything like that. Let's live our lives, but let's live our lives with our feet on the ground, right? But we allow ourselves to follow the masses. So perhaps 2 reincarnations from now, we're going to look back and say, I was doing the same thing. We'll be better off to accept that we were part of that group of people. Sometimes I wonder, where was I in my last reincarnation? I start thinking out loud, 30, maybe if I was a good boy on the other side, 30 years to reincarnate in, late 70s and whatnot. I was actually in maybe discarnated back in the 40s or 30s, right? What was I following? What was my ideas, right? And I'm just, thinking out loud. But let's think about it. So those individuals of them, it's very easy, to judge them and say they were so wrong. Yes, they were, but that's what they were offered. And the only thing is that they didn't question. Some of them did, right? We see some of them, some of the individuals who question, and we also see the consequences of it, right? They stand out, but they stand out in a very difficult way, right? Sometimes put to death, sometimes being imprisoned because they were completely out of the curve. This is a very different individual. We don't like this person because we don't follow the masses. We don't accept the fact that you have to wear this. No, wait a minute. It's nice that everybody has this or that, but I also have my wants, right? Sometimes I do not know what I want. Most of the time, this is what I like to tell people. I do know what I do not want, right? Because it's like, do I know what I want? No, but most of the time, I know what I do not want because we know the consequences, right? To finalize, they believe, or at least profess to believe, in providence, the immortality of the soul, eternal punishment, and the resurrection of the dead. Jesus, who above all else values simplicity in the qualities of the heart, and who preferred in the law the spirit. In the law, the spirit, which gives life to the letter, which kills, strove throughout his mission to unmask their hypocrisy, and as a result made them his fierce enemies. This is the reason why they allied themselves with the chief priests in order to incite the people against him and put him to death. One thing here that I want to highlight, that I want to bring here, Jesus wasn't doing this to make them their enemies. Jesus was being Jesus, a high order spirit, doing what he was supposed to do, to love and guide us. As a consequence, that's what happened. What happened? The Pharisees hated him, right? So much so that there was hate, that they connected with the high priests that had a great influence on the people then, to say this guy is really out of the curve, right? So he cannot stay around here because he's just going to create problems, right? He's different. Sometimes we feel different, right? When we're following something more appealing to our lives, right? So I just want to bring that highlight, because sometimes we get caught up in words that it's like, Jesus wasn't trying to create enemies. Jesus was trying to be Jesus. That is very far from us. And sometimes we feel that way as well, right? That it's like, well, guess what? Can't please everybody, right? It's not that we're going to please ourselves, but can't please everybody. And the moment we try to do that, we start going with the masses. We start to blind ourselves as well. And that's one of the great callings of Jesus towards us, talking about the Pharisees. They are blind individuals guiding blind people. Now, rhetorical question. Who here thinks that we have some Pharisee inside of us? You don't have to answer it, but it's a question that we need to ask. Because when we go back and we start thinking about that, look, we follow the masses, we are a product of the environment. Give an example. Our founding fathers. When we look back, and I know this is going to be online, and perhaps people will say, what are you talking about? But they had slaves, right? They had slaves. And they were fighting to seize slavery in this country, but they had slavery. They had slaves, right? They had people working for them that was not getting a salary, right? Or not receiving anything. It was not even a barter, right? That you do this for me, guess what? I'll give you corn, whatever it was, right? So we look back and say, were there bad individuals? Well, that was certainly a not good action to have those individuals, but they were a product of the environment, right? They were trying to liberate themselves from it the best way they could, right? But it still happened. So what about ourselves? Perhaps we're not slavering people, but we are following certain things that perhaps we shouldn't be following, right? And it's up to each one of us to. We don't have to make it public. We leave that to our obsessors, right? They know, they can see it. When we are saying something, it's very beautiful, but what is inside of us? What is inside of us towards ourselves? This is I would like to pound on this idea. What is inside of us towards ourselves? Because sometimes we're not saying towards if I may ask Daniel, it's a little bit too warm in here. Maybe not. Is everybody okay? Okay. But I know that the sound will but I just want to. Sometimes we're not saying things towards other people, but we're thinking about ourselves. We're being so judgmental to ourselves that we barely look on the mirror and say, I love you. We cannot even say it. Try to look in the mirror and say, I love you. It's hard. It's very hard. Yes, a lot of people led me into this blindness. Well, guess what? You can start to love yourself. Yeah, a lot of people told us that we're not capable, that we didn't do this, that we're from another country, we have this or that limitation. But what do I have that I can bring to the table to live a better life, right? So just want to ask you guys to think about that as well. And our followers, not to say our prosecutors, right? Our friends from the past that is not so friendly anymore, they're looking at it and they feed on it. They feed from it, right? They know that that's the Achilles tendon that Leo has. That's what I'm going to touch on, because that's the downfall, right? I'm allowing the blind to lead me, who is now blind. So let's give a continuation to this. I want to bring some examples that we can talk about it. The main thing we're talking about now, the physical life, right? Our environment. Hopefully we can extrapolate this in our minds and our hearts as well. Whatever we're living, whatever we're going through, perhaps at home, perhaps at work, at the Spiritist Center sometimes, right? Which is a beautiful place to be, because at the Spiritist Center, we don't have a person that we follow, a guru, right? Or a priest or anyone. Each one of us can do what we can do, and we do it together, right? When I'm saying these things, perhaps it's with my heart really shaking that I'm not putting to good use these techniques, these ideas, these learnings that we have from the gospel the way I'm supposed to. And I believe that if I can do this, like if I can come in the front and talk, and if you can, much better than I do. And I'm not the greatest speaker, and I don't think I will be ever in this life. But what I'm trying to say is that each one of us have our qualities that we can be a good guiding model for other people as well. So thank God we don't have these individuals that we bound down anymore, that we have to do this, that we fear, right? That we go to a place and say, what if this person does this? And if it happens, we are entitled to say, this is not a good place to do this, right? Or this is not a good thing for you, because guess what? If we continue this way, there will be nobody at Spiritist Center, right? So in any case, for us just to think that we have to, where we can apply this message, right? So we're thinking about the physical environment. Caiba Schultz, on this beautiful book, unfortunately, is still in Portuguese only, called Parábolas e Ensinos de Jesus, Parables and Teachings of Christ. He talks about this parable, and he says something really interesting. We talked about the physical, but he says, imagine now a blind person walking alone, a materialist, voluntarily blind upon arriving in the spiritual world. How can he walk? This man did not seek to study the spiritual world, nor did he even believe in the hereafter or the life after life. He ignores the meaning of the words immortality, eternity, and God. Do we know somebody that crossed to the other side, that found him or herself this way? Do we? We do. We study. We have learned, right? And this is the two examples that I would like to bring under Luis. In his poetical way, this is more on chapter 3 when he is actually identifying on, from the book Nosular, when he's actually waking up and trying to understand where he was at that moment after the rescue from where he was, right? He was a blind man. And he says the following. After he sees the sun entering, he says, I was like a blind man who, after living so long in darkness, is blessed with the ability to see the splendor of nature. And he even says that he never noticed the light of the sun as he was doing at that moment. A blind person. And he became blind. He became blind, right? He developed this blindness, right? During his life in the physical body. How can you come, and I quote Haroldo again because he talked about this in one of his talks, how can you incarnate and you're full of expectations from yourself, not others expecting you, and you leave the physical body worse than you came? It's possible. And we see here, worse than he came. Now, did he develop in other areas? I'm quite sure, right? Did he develop after this? Did he become a better person? I am quite certain. So much so that he wrote about it to alert us, right? He said, you know what? The past is the past. Let me write to these people now what can happen to us, right? So if anything, we put aside the physical life and say, yeah, it was pretty difficult. But what he did after was tremendous, right? And it helps us. I hope that it helps us quite a bit, right? And it's interesting that there are so many different types of blindness in the physical realm, right? While we're incarnated, not only this right here. Interesting. I was earlier today washing it because we become blind and then we forget to wash it, right? We become forgetful as well, that we have to wash it, make sure that it's clean. But there are actually different blindness as well in the spiritual realm. Messengers. What does he say? In the chapter 14, as we study about 2 weeks ago, he says the following. He's actually talking to the mentor that is guiding him into new endeavors. And he makes a comment that, look, I went back and I wanted to help some people, but it's so difficult. I don't have the capabilities to do so. I want to help them, but I'm blind. And then the mentor says the following. You weren't able to help your incarnate friends at those times, Andrea, because you hadn't yet acquired the ability to see. Sorry. But that is reasonable. Look at the compassion here. That is reasonable. While in the flesh, we are often inclined to notice only the effects without considering the causes behind them. In that beggar, we see only in visions. In the ailing person, only a physical breakdown. However, it is crucial to identify the causes. Different type of blindness. It is us trying to help someone else blindly. When do we see somebody crying and we ask the person and we let the person speak, what do you need? Right? We often say, well, the person's crying, maybe the person is hungry, or maybe the person is this. We start to assuming, right? And we want to speak more than the individual himself or herself that is going through the trouble. What the person sometimes needs is just for us to listen, right? Or how many times we ask a person, what do you want for your life? What would be the perfect condition of your life right now? To be in a good, well condition right now. And we're talking about physically, mentally, and spiritually as well. When do we ask that? When do we help the individual to become a visionary of their better way? Very often, we go in the spiral ebb to also get connected with the ideals of that individual. If they complain that oh, you know what, my husband is horrible. Okay, what did he do now? Right? Oh, my wife is doing this. Okay, look, don't worry about it. Oh, let's get to the bottom of it. Can we talk? Do you need to, to talk? Right? Or how can we help? What can be of help? Right? Or sometimes and say, I'm not the greatest person to help you, but let me tell you someone else who can. Or let me give you a book, right? That will be able to assist you as well. So the reason we bring this here, because there are many, many, many examples, is for us to really analyze that there are many types of blindness. There are several types of blindness that is very hard to get rid of because the imposition of other blind people in our lives, right? Right now, for a man to cry, it's a little bit better than the past. But we come from a society that is men don't cry. Men cannot show emotions, right? We have to be tough. And yes, we did our part. But there are some times that it's like, look, I'm pretty upset, right? It's okay to verbalize it, but how we verbalize is quite different from what we used to do in the past, right? Gladiators, doing things to one another that nowadays, thank God, we have laws that kind of prevents us from going crazy, right? Or making it worse, right? One of the great elements of laws is to prevent people from making it worse, right? I kill one individual, guess what? That who suffer the blow will now kill two. And then I'll go and multiply that. Oh, you did that, I'm going to do more damage. It's one of the elements that if we think about it. And that is so great for us when we think about that we have a laws, right? And organizations that tells us, let's stop right there, right? So this is to show that we have progressed, right? But the idea again, the blindness leading the blind. And us, blind individuals, allowing blind people to guide us. Very often. It happens very, very often. Another parenthesis that I want to like to make it here, there are many things that I would like to bring, but if you think about it, that it's not necessarily what the person says sometimes, right? But what we construct of others, right? When we're so blind that we construct things of others that it's not true. I will not lie. I have led people that way. Unfortunately, because it's my demeanor, being tall, when I speak, the way I speak as well, sometimes too direct, right? And I say too because some individuals have come to me and said, I thought that you were arrogant. Why is that? Because when I know it's kind of hard to be, yeah, right? I mean, I was like, no, at first I was like, but because we conduct ourselves in certain ways that we don't want to allow certain things to happen or to continue to happen, we have to be certain. Okay, this is, like I said earlier, I know what I do not want, and it's not to fall in this pit. Maybe we can fall someplace else, right? But here, together in this location, now we're not going to fall, right? So there were situations that some individuals came to me and said, I thought you were an arrogant person. I'm like, well, why is that? Because you spoke this and this and this way. And I said, and what do you think that was? And the person, some of them, I'm not going to say all of them, some of them thought that afterwards they saw the benefits of it and said, because you were preventing something else from happening. I felt good about it. But then I started looking at and say, maybe I need to tone down a little bit and tone down a little bit more and tone down. And that is super hard. I gotta tell you, that is super difficult, right? Because you're going against yourself. You're going to against your fibers to say, slow down, right? Let us not be so demanding with the looks, with the way we speak, thinking that everybody reads your life, reads you the way you read yourself. And the opposite is true as well, right? So people create those constructs about ourselves, and we create constructs about, we construct a demon of a person that is not true, right? So let's be careful with that. Let us truly be careful with that, because it leads us in certain situations that is it stops us from living harmoniously with ourselves and with others as well. And if anybody comes to you and said, you did not handle that well, right? Or sometimes they slap on our face too, because we try to bite them, they try to bite us back, right? It's okay. Try and understand. One of the things that the gospel according to spiritism tells us is that take those that try us as the best way to learn. Give thanks when certain people comes and put us down, right? Put in our place. See, check, in fact, if there is a truth to it. And if there is, guess what? The best moment for us to go ahead and say, I'm sorry, right? I made a mistake. I should know better, but I don't. And I need your help now to make it better, forgiving me, right? And become a better individual. To finalize, folks, to avoid spiritual blindness, what can we do? What can we do to avoid spiritual blindness? The Gospel according to Spiritism, the Consoling Christ, chapter 6, the Spirit Truth tells us the following. O Spiritists, love one another. This is the first teaching. Educate yourselves. This is the second. We just said a bunch of examples here. And by the way, this is not just the what the Spirit says. There is much more to this, but and it goes back to the pride and selfishness, right? On how we see the world, how we portray ourselves, and all those things. But love one another. Are we doing that the best way possible? Rhetorical question. I don't have to answer. Vladimir's like, no, I know, right? But it's not just to love one another to say good morning, good afternoon. Beyond that, what are we doing? What are we doing with the physical sense? What are we doing in the spiritual sense, with our thoughts, with our feelings, right? The worst thing is one of the most difficult things to do is to pray for someone who trespassed our boundaries, right? And those, especially boundaries that are very, very well constructed, right? The fences that we create and say, this is my limit, and they go over the limit. They jump that fence, and you're like, wow. It's difficult, right? For us to, at those moments or intimate moments that we have, to pray for that individual and say, he's learning, she's learning, right? And hopefully this is not going to happen again. And I pray that. So how are we loving one another, right? And then educate ourselves. This, I brought something that is very interesting from the Law of Work of the Spirit's book, chapter 3, from the third part as well. Towards the end of the law, the discussion, questions and answers of the law, and this is not the whole thing, the spirits are actually giving us some teachings in terms of how do we produce enough to have enough for one another, right? Or how do we produce? How do we make it enough in terms of through the hard work, so that all of us can eat, all of us can have the same means, right? And then there's something that he says, and this is a short version of it. There is an element that has not been sufficiently pondered, but without which economic science is nothing more than theory. Education. Not intellectual education, but moral education. Not moral education through books, but moral education that consists in the art of forming character. Moral education that creates habits, because education is the sum of acquired habits. When one considers the mass of individuals who are daily thrown into the torrent of the population without principles, without restraint, and handed over to their own instincts, can we wonder at the disastrous consequences? When the art of education is recognized, understood, and practiced, all individuals over the world will follow the habits of order and forethought for themselves and their dependents. They will respect whatever respectable and will have habits that will enable them to less painfully endure unavoidable, adverse days. Disorder and lack of forethought are two sores that only a sound education can heal. That is the starting point, the real element of well being, the guarantee of security for all. What One of the things that stands out with this is the idea of forethought, right? If I act this way, where will this take me? Consequently, if I act this way, where will this take us? Right? For us to look at and say, oh no, this is a limit. Wait a minute. If I eat that second piece of cheesecake, the sugar will skyrocket, right? It's good with coffee, but wait a minute, this is the limit. And tomorrow, if we do that, we'll have another piece of cake. Hopefully, that's not going to be every single day of the week, but we got to think about tomorrow. And we got to be thinking about others as well, right? Perhaps I'm not going to eat this cake by myself, but with others. Right? And I'm giving this mundane, very mundane example, but there are many things of life that we see that others are lacking, right? If I am a prideful individual, right, that think that I am the most enlightened being in the world or in the universe, rather, guess what? I'm not thinking about the future. Selfishness, the same thing. I want it for me, and that's it. The rest, the needs of others, doesn't really matter, right? So let us think about education, as we say here, as it's being said here, in terms of moral education. The books are amazing, that brings us technology, the articles that we can read, and the things that we learn, right? But how can I use this to better my life and the life of others, right? You can have just a small conversation like we're having earlier today, right? About the things that we learn in school. Right. So how am I going to go ahead and put this into practice right now? To be that superhero and say, I want to save the world. Right? When I say the world, it can be that little community or your home, right? When we do the God at home, that is, guess what? We are saving the world. Because during that moment, we could be thinking things that is not productive. But you're saving the world in that moment. You're connecting with higher minds. And then so on, and so on, and so forth. Because the next day when you go to work, you're going to remember that lesson. And instead of shouting and showing yourself the way perhaps you shouldn't show, like it happened to me, right? I'll think twice. I will turn around, go do something else, and then come back. Dear friend, let us try to do this differently. Instead of say, do this way, right? Instead of being a little bit too direct, right? To say that way. So the idea of moral education. I'll finalize with this beautiful example right here. Saul. Who thinks Saul was a Pharisee? Was he a Pharisee? All right, in a way. Jeanette says no. Who thinks Saul was a Pharisee? Well, let's hear from what he said. In Philippians 3:4-6, he says the following. If someone else thinks they have reasons to put confidence in the flesh, look what he's talking about, in the flesh. I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, in regard to the law, a Pharisee. As for zeal, persecuting the church, as for righteousness based on the law, faultless. He said himself. And he was saying this because he was talking to people about their condition in terms of thinking about what they are, what they have, the power that they have, the construct that they create about themselves because of what they had in their lifetime. And he says after this that nothing is worthy when we are trying to serve our Master Jesus. None of this helped him at all. If anything, he used a lot of these things to help redeem others. But in terms directly, no. One of the beautiful things that he does that it's not here, but he was also a Roman citizen. So he uses that idea when we read Paul of Stephen of being a citizen, right? That he's like, you know what? I have the right of a fair trial because I'm a Roman citizen. And that's what he does. And he buys more time to stay on earth, to help more people. I'm talking about on earth, incarnated, right? Just kind of giving a little bit scoop of the teaching here to say, you know what? Let's go through this whole thing. If I'm here, I'll stay. For some of us, we would say, yeah, take me out of misery, right? But he said, no. You're not going to get rid of me that way. I'm a Roman citizen, so I'm entitled to this fair trial. But this only happens after he becomes Paul, right? No longer Saul. So there was a switch, there was a flip in order for him to find out that, look, this is what I was, and this was not what is converging, right? The practices, the culture, right? Everything that came along with those times, those groups of people. There is actually translations that it says a Pharisee of the Pharisees, right? So he said himself, because he was using the teachings, the law, to oppress other people, to persecute others, to kill people. But he changed. And there is something that I'll leave you with, another aha moment, even though we have studied this book, we have read this book, we're reading again for later on, we'll make it public with one of the works that we're trying to put together. We're reading again with different eyes, with different lenses, right? Because every time we read, we leave some blindness behind, and then we come with other blindness that perhaps will be satisfied. But this is really interesting. Without Stephen, this is Emmanuel brings to us. Without Stephen, we would have no Paul of Tarsus. The great martyr of nascent Christianity exerted much more influence on the Pauline experience than we could imagine solely through the known texts of earthly studies. The lives of both men were entwined in mysterious beauty. The contribution of Stephen and other personages of this true story confirm the necessity and universality of the law of working together. And to demonstrate the breadth of this concept, we should remember that Jesus, whose compassion and power touched everything, sought the company of 12 helpers in order to undertake the world's renewal. It made me think that what we are today is a consequence of all of these beautiful things that happened to us, including the blind people who led us blindly as well. That if we're here sitting today, we owe to them. And there would be no Aloysia, no Antonia, no Leo, because of these individuals with us. We had a Stephen in our lives, right? our mentors, the mentors of the SSB. And I was thinking, there is no act of charity that is not preceded by an act of humility. When we speak of charity here, true charity, okay, it's not the one that say, okay, let me give you this guy some money so I can show off, right? The right hand seeing what the left hand is doing, vice versa, whatever hand you use. We don't have to go into the details like the Pharisees now. But there is no act of charity that is not preceded by an act of humility. If we think about it, Stephen didn't have to prove himself, but he humbled himself the way he brought what he was, the good news to the world, and inspired indirectly or perhaps directly Saul of Tarsus. Right? If you think about it, the same is true for an act of humbleness, right? Because Paul had to humble himself and saying, this is not the right way. There is something inside of me that is still crying, right? For me to be a better man. This is not fulfilling at all. Who am I fooling? Myself, obviously, right? But he had to humble himself to accept that charity that was already produced, that seed that was already produced by Stephen. And it's the same thing in our lives. If we want to become a transformed person, guess what? We have to come in terms with the fact that I'm wrong. I can change. We are blind individuals. How can I see? And that's exactly what Andre Luis is doing when the mentor is talking to him in the messengers. This is what you're going to do. There's this preparation. There's this chamber that you're going to go to, and they're going to help you this way. But you also can further development this capability to see further or to see the causes of the effect through prayer. Through prayer. So to finalize, let us be this Saul of Tarsus, not killing individuals, but that goes through that redemptive moment in our lives. We don't have to go to the desert for how many years he went, but we can go to the desert of our homes and stop and think, what can I do better? What can I learn from this difficult moment that I'm going through, from this blindness? And most importantly, how can I not, right, lead blind people to worse conditions, to different blindness, right? Sometimes that individual brings that, oh, I got this done, but it was so hard. Well, did you do the way I told you? No. Oh, great. You tried. Try it again. And try it again. And try it again. Elevate the individual. Elevate the environment. At least the person's trying. It's very difficult for us to look on from the positive side because we were told by other blind people that we have to put ourselves down, right? So we hope that when we look at the idea of the blind leading the blind, we're not judging others. We're not looking at others in a negative way or ourselves. We are not, consequently, thinking about the idea of corrupting ourselves, right? Because we don't want to be part of this whole game. And we're taking charge. We're taking responsibility, right? So we hope this helped. We hope that now that you know a little bit about the blind leading the blindness, we can think for ourselves. We can say, there are other ways for us to lead our lives, right? And if there are some individuals trying to lead us blindly, it's okay to also, in a nice way, to say, not for me. And if they open themselves, say, well, let's try it a different way, right? We have this power. Not to think that we are the greatest, that we don't have anything to learn, but there are certain things that happens in our lives that can lead us to believe that, I thought that this was correct, but it's not, right? So thank you for this moment. Thank you for listening. I would like to open for comments, questions that you may have. If not, it's okay as well. But we will open up for us on the web. Daniel, should I open here or?
I'll, I'll keep over here. So there is question from Australia. Wow.
Hello from
Um,
Australia. Didn't
you're
I
gonna
say
go to
good
Australia,
morning?
right?
The down
So,
under. Mhm.
just a minute. So the question is there a specific prayer for those who have trespassed against us, please?
Wow. I'm trying to remember now our gospel according to Spiritism. If there is one specific. There are several there. I don't remember. Chapter 28. Yes, the whole chapter is for prayers, right? But I'm trying to remember if there is one of the items with there are prayers that are specific for it. So if you want to be more specific, you can go to chapter 28 of the Gospel According to Spiritism and look there. Um, what I would say in terms of having something specific is to think about of what happened. That trespass, right? How, as I was giving the example earlier today, um, how was the fence jumped, right? Or did the was the fence broken as well? Why am I saying this? Because in order for us to shift, in order for us to think, right, into or to realize a new beginning, guess what? We need to live that difficult. We need to go through that moment. The worst thing that we can do is to say, I don't like this person. Please, God, help. Go through it. Cry. Talk to someone. Talk to a therapist, but live through it. Because I guarantee you, if we don't do that, we're going to be trying to pray. We're not going to pray. We're going to try to pray every single night. And that's not going to stop haunting you. So, if anything, come to terms with those moments. As I said earlier, I forget the chapter of the Gospel according to Spiritism, but come to terms with those individuals, come to terms with those moments, and remember that they are not perfect, just as we are not perfect. And then I'm quite sure that the prayer will develop from that, the prayer that will be developed from it will be much better. And you will show your heart. I am upset. This hurts. Or I miss you, right? What you did really left a void, right? But hopefully in the next life, if it is the case, I mean, we'll get together, right? No, and it's true because sometimes we think that praying is to push somebody away. No, give them a hug, right? Really feel it, really connect with that individual. Don't go blind on the situation since we're talking about being blind, right? Because sometimes we pray blindly. Our words are just a bunch of words and has no meaning whatsoever. When I say meaning, feelings. And I'll be I'll open up here and I'll show a level of how do we say again? I need a lot of help with that as well, because we are taught blindly, and we receive it blindly as well, that man should not have feelings, right? And we were corrupted with the idea that you know you cannot show your emotions, right? And we create this thing. So we forget to deal with it, and that keeps haunting us, haunting us, haunting us more and more, right? Because we never really gave the 10 minutes that we need to give to it, or sometimes several days to say, I want to part from this. So hopefully it helps. Chapter 28 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, and live through it. Anyone here before we go to the next one, Daniel? Janet, please.
Leo, as you said, many things can, throw us to blindness, impulsiveness, hate, judgment, shame. And how can you change our lives? How can you change your life to be blind? I know it's through education. I mean, I know it's through prayer, but what more? What more can? How can how can you live your life without being blind all the time? Because if someone upset you, you get blind. If someone do something to you, you judge, you get blind, and you jump in conclusion. How do you should live your life, the daily life, safe, be without being this blindness?
Good question. Be alone. Question yourself. We talked about one in the Maryland um, symposium, right? When we think about thought, sometimes I'm doing things at home or at work, and then that thought comes. And it's like, okay, why? Did I see something that remind me of that event or that individual? Or did I read something? Or is this coming back to me like for no apparent reason, right? And we start thinking about it. Question, literally question, why did I think of this? And trace it back. Just like when we lose a key and we trace back, right, with, okay, where, and we ask the dog, please help me. But the dog is looking at us like, what are you talking about, right? Trace it back. Do that. And I guarantee you that we will not allow ourselves, number one, to live a blind life. That everything comes to us and we just, it's okay. That's living blindly. And if it is something negative, I go back to what I was saying. Okay, why is this negative thought, feeling, connection, if I have with others, coming back to me now? Is it the right moment? If it isn't, give the right moment to it, right? Give the right moment to it. And it's important for us to really debrief. If you can resolve it, ask for help, right? That I would say is one of the number one things that we can do. And to be watchful, watch and pray. To be watchful in the sense that, okay, if I have this limitation that I cannot deal with this temptation, why is that so? Do I find the reason in this lifetime? Are the bases in this lifetime, right? Or is if it isn't here, most of them are, by the way, and this is from the gospel according to Spiritism. Most of the issues that we are suffering right now, our difficulties, is created in this lifetime, right? Because if we were to suffer all from the past that we have created, we wouldn't be able to bear ourselves, right? So thank God for the forgiveness of the past and God's grace as well. But truly, ask yourself, what triggers me? When I get upset with that person, what triggered this feeling? Is it a fear? Is it something that happened in the past that perhaps now we're reliving that moment that we never took care of it, right? That is why, really finding a therapist, finding something in our lives that brings us joy, to reassess ourselves is important. That is why vacation is important. Not just to go to the beach like Leo likes to go, but yeah, go to the beach. But when you're underwater, think about life. Do the things that you like to do. Go to the river, or during the winter, during the summer, whatever that is, right? When you're taking a trip to work, make that moment of your of self-analysis, and that will lead us from the blindness. Hopefully that helps. It's quite a bit, but yeah, and never forget prayer. Daniel.
Question from Yas Aracava. Hi, Leo. More rigid. Okay, let me see here. There is two questions. Okay, so it's the same question. Thanks. I will no, more rigidly and applying the rituals in religions or in various congregations. It seems more we find blind leading blind. Are the rituals purposely reinforced by those in power?
Yes, I would say yes, um, because the fear of losing the power, right, of not being above others. It's that step that Saul went through for quite some time, right? He did not want to lose the 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 culture aspect, the what they have been doing for quite some time. And this is the parenthesis that I want to make it here. The reason we're doing it is because we've been doing for quite some time repetitively. And it's really hard to get rid of that idea or that whatever we're doing, the ritual, right? Because that's how we connect with this God that we constructed as well. So extremely hard. So I'm saying this so that we're not too judgmental on these individuals, but we see that that is true, right? That is extremely true, that we see certain things that to us is like, are you kidding me? It's 2023 and we're still doing this to one another. But where were we before? What are we? Where are we now? Right? So we need to be careful with this. And this sometimes can be as subtle as the toxic friend from work. That it's so hard to even go to work because we are afraid of that toxic individual. Because they're not taking their ritual is to make our lives miserable, is to steal our energies by the comments that that individual makes, that the way that they live their lives. And we don't even want to get up in the morning because we feel that that is a toxic environment. And what do? Do we pray for that individual? Do we get to the root causes of it, right? Or are we seeing just is this person suffering at home? Many cases dealing with the corporate world, I have seen situations where if the husband is not in a good marriage at home, at work, that person will impose themselves or himself. If that person does not have a partner to talk to, they will talk your ears to death because they try to compensate, right? And we lead others blindly, making us crazy. And what do? It's okay for us to put a stop to it. We should. Otherwise, we'll just continue to be blind individuals. And they will continue to be blind individuals. There is a passage, I forget the book once more, but I think Yasko actually brought this case to us many years ago, right? It's like two friends get to the other side. One was a spiritist and the other not. The other friend that was not a spiritist, when it gets to the other side, it's like, wait a minute, you were a spiritist your whole life and you never told me about this? What kind of friend is this, right? Because it's the person never presented that opportunity for the friend to become a better individual, to think about the afterlife as we learn here today. So it's important for us to really put into perspective this idea, right? That what are we doing, right? So, and think about the other side. Pain, whoever causes pain or is inciting pain on someone else's life, guess what? They're feeling it. There's something that is really hurting them, and they want to hurt others as well. So hopefully that helps. Daniel, do we have anyone else here? Or give I know we're coming close to a closing here. Just want to invite everyone to really think about this, and as we lead our lives, the pictures are beautiful and everything, but if we are blind, let us humble ourselves to receive the help of those who already put themselves forth for us, but we're not seeing it, right? If we're leading someone to a difficult situation by imposing our ways, but by being judgmental, by exposing our wants and our needs only, let us think twice, right? So there's the two sides of the story: the blind who's being led, and the blind who's leading, and we cannot be neither, right? So I thank you for the opportunity to speak, and hopefully now that we know this beautiful parable, we can talk to others as well, right? And help them do the same. Thank you.